Welcome to Rewrite the Mother Code, the show where we can explore our inner mothers to actualize our greatest selves. Through interviews with incredible guests, live coaching sessions, and my own experiences, we're going to dive deep into embracing feminine values and reparenting ourselves. So be prepared to show up, hold space, and be mothered in a way that you never have before, but have always needed. It's time to rewrite the mother code. Hi, and well, now here we officially are. I'm so excited to be on this episode with Mary Adkins. Mary, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to chatting.
I know. We were having a very fun chat prior to this. We've talked before, and I'm super excited for all we're going to dig into on this episode. But since you all don't know Mary, I'm going to share, as I usually do, kind of some typical bio stuff, but I don't mean typical like Mary's is typical, but more of the nuts and bolts of Mary, and then we'll get to know her and all the really wonderful things she's doing. So a little bit of what Mary's been up to and how she's working in the writing world and doing some really cool things. So she is a writing coach and founder of the Book Incubator, a 12-month program to write, revise, and pitch your novel or memoir. She's author of the novels When You Read This, which is an Indie Next Pick Best Book of 2019 by Good Housekeeping and Real Simple. Another book called Privilege, Today.com, Best Summer Read, New York Post, Best Read of the Week. So really great press on these. And Palm Beach, recently named one of the New York Post Best Books of 2021. So I know I'm excited to add those to my book reading list, but her books have been published in 13 countries, and her essays and reporting have appeared in the New York Times, The Atlantic, Slate, and more. She's a graduate of Yale Law School and Duke University. She helps aspiring authors finish their books with joy and clarity. You can apply for the Book Incubator by going to apply.maryadkinswriter.com. And I know I just said that all really fast, but we'll have it in the show notes and we'll underline it again at the end of the episode. So welcome again, Mary. And I'm so excited to dig into you as a mother, as a writer, as a business owner, entrepreneur, you know, all the things and how you're doing that. Because I know when we talked, there's a lot of inspiration there, you know, just from your journey and then how you've been supporting others in theirs. So if you don't mind now, if we could hear about that, from you personally about all of this.
Yeah, sure. So one thing not in my bio is that I'm also the mother of a 5-year-old named Finn, Finn, Finn. And we now live in Dallas. We did live in Nashville very recently, but we moved to Dallas this year. My 3 novels, let me start at, let's see. So I was a lawyer for a very short time. For only 7 months out of law school was I a lawyer because it wasn't a great fit for me. I was in litigation and I'm anti-confrontational, so just not a great fit. But also it did not give me time to write. And that's really what I had wanted to do since I was a little girl. So I left my job really quickly, got a tutoring job to pay my bills, and started writing and wanted to be an author. I mean, I specifically wanted to write books. I wasn't sure if I wanted to write fiction or like memoir or funny essays or novels. I wasn't sure quite what I wanted to write. I just knew I wanted to write books. That was my ambition. It's kind of cute to me looking back now that I really thought it would take me about a year to get a book, to write a book and get a book deal. And it did not take me a year. A year is a very short amount of time. It took me 7 years. And during those 7 years, I was working on what became ultimately my first novel, called When You Read This. And I'm sharing all this to say, like, that experience of writing my first novel I was in my 20s. For part of it, I was dating my husband, the man who would become my husband. But for some of it, I wasn't. I was single. I was like living in this apartment by myself. I was meeting my friends for drinks. I was like tutoring at night, but during the day, I could just sit in coffee shops and write. at the time, I didn't think about it this way, but I had so much time looking back. Like I just really luxuriated in the amount of time that I
just
had.
have no idea until you don't have that time.
Right. Like it's not that I didn't appreciate, like I'm not shaming my younger self. Like she should have appreciated what she had. Like I couldn't have, I didn't know. And I think I did appreciate it in the ways I knew how to, but it was luxurious. I mean, it was like 7 hours that I could write in a given day without any interruption. And I could delete everything I had written and not worry about the time I spent writing it. And then my second novel sold. The way that it often works in publishing is that, at least with fiction, with novels, is that after you have your first book deal, you can sell your subsequent novels on a proposal. You don't have to write it. You can get the book contract before you have even written the book. You write like a synopsis of it and sell it to your publisher. I did that for my second and third novels. And my second novel sold on a proposal the night that I had a baby, that I had my son. So that happened the same I was like in my hospital
twins.
bed. I birthed twins. Yeah.
I didn't even know it.
That's amazing. I was in my hospital bed and like opened my email and it was like, your book sold. And I was like, oh, cool. I showed my sister the email. So it was like we would joke that it was this like precipitous 24 hours.
Yeah.
But the reality of it was I had gotten a baby and a book contract that I now had a deadline for because I hadn't written it yet. And I got them on the same day. It was like, here's a newborn.
So I love it so much just because it really is like now I said that kind of jokingly, but it really is twins, like two things that need a tremendous amount of time, attention, and care.
Yeah. It was like, I mean, I agree. I think I've never thought of it that way. And it did feel like that. And there was something kind of magical about it and just really not unsettling is the wrong word. It just like, I mean, a baby throws everything in your life up in the air anyway. But the combination of these two things at the same time did in a really specific way, because I had also, at this point, just a few months earlier, 9-10 months earlier, it was pretty well timed, taken a full-time job so that I could get health insurance so that I could have a baby and not pay out of pocket, because my husband and I were both like freelancers.
Sure.
And so we had really kind of structured that very intentionally to try to mitigate some of the medical bills from childbirth. Mm-hmm. And so I had taken this full-time job for the first time in like 8 years. And I had a maternity leave. So I was on this 9-week maternity leave. And I remember thinking like, okay, I can't have a full-time job and a baby and write a book at the same time. So I have to write the book.
Maybe we're capable of so much, but maybe all three of those.
Maybe that's too much. Mm-hmm. So I was like, there was a small part of me that was like, maybe I won't go back to my job, but let me just assume that I will. I mean, because I had managed to like live on a freelancer's income up until this point. Like I really had gone for the health insurance. But I thought, well, let me assume I will, because I felt indebted to my employer and I really liked my employer. So I thought, well, I'm going to try to write this draft during my maternity leave. Like that makes the most sense to me, to just try to knock out the draft during my maternity leave. And sometimes when I say that now, it sounds kind of crazy. And I think sometimes when I tell people this, they look at me like it's crazy. It did not feel crazy at the time. It felt very reasonable in a way. Like it just kind of made sense. And I don't know that it, in some ways, maybe it was a kind of toxic productivity that I thought, oh, I'm going to write a book during my maternity leave. But my husband has been the first one to say, he's like, I think that was the best possible thing for you at that time, because it got me, I had to get dressed because I couldn't write in our house because we lived in this little apartment and the baby was crying all the time and I couldn't write even if the baby wasn't crying. Like I couldn't write just sitting right now.
The space is really important for sure.
So I had to leave. Like the baby got to keep the apartment. So like I would have to get dressed. I would have to shower. I would have to get dressed. I would have to get my tablet that I wrote on or my computer and go sit in a coffee shop and like pull my head outside of out of new mom stupor and into a whole make-believe world. And it was really hard to do. Like it was the hardest it had ever been. Mm-hmm. But like I said, Lucas, my husband, has since said, like, I think that was like really good for you. And once he said it, I was like, I think you're right. I think it was.
And you wouldn't have planned it. And I think in the Rewrite the Mother Code framework, when we're always looking at like how mothering choices are often like dictated by our family or our culture, like that would be one that probably if you made this choice by talking to a lot of other people and listening to what they all said, you wouldn't have done it, right? It would have been like, no, like either you can't, or that's not good for you, or, you would have gotten
so interesting.
So much. And I'm not saying there wouldn't have been people that would have supported you, right? But there would have been a lot more fear around it, or skepticism, at least skepticism, like of what's
absolutely
possible. So
I had never thought about it that way. And I was just going to say, I mean, at one point during that time, I did give myself a month. The first month of my maternity leave, I did not work on anything. Then I kicked it up. So I had about 7 weeks left to do it. And during that 7 weeks, I hired a friend of mine to help me out with childcare. She would come for a few hours a day. And I was just thinking, like, if I had not had a book contract, and so it was like Mary hired her friend to come take care of her 7-week-old, or no, her 4-week-old baby, so she could write a novel like in Starbucks. I don't know that would have gone over very well. Right? Like, I think
for sure.
Like, what is wrong with her? That's weird.
Right.
Like, I don't know. No, there would have come with some judgment, I think.
Exactly. So I love that. That's why I think I love when we can kind of step back and look at like, wow, what a gift that those have, like that timing and you might have chosen, it's not like any choice was wrong. Like you might have chosen like, no, I'm not going to do this. Right. Cause that just doesn't feel right. Like, but you didn't have any of those strong signs and you're like, I'm going to go for it and see. And then, we get to break the norm and see what's possible. And then that doesn't, just to give other options. And like, that's what I always want is like, there isn't like one way to think about these things. And, and I can actually relate. So I was working as a litigation consultant at the time, very different, economic consulting and litigation for just a one-person operation. And I had hired a replacement. I didn't know how long I was going to take off, but I hired somebody to step in and do my job. And she literally quit. My boss like called me like the day I gave birth and said, well, just want to say like so-and-so like quit. So if you would consider coming back sooner, as immediately as you are willing to. But same thing, right? Like that wasn't my plan. I had pictured maybe like some extended not work time, but I think it was the best thing for me too, for all the reasons that you said, so I think sometimes circumstances intervene themselves, and I could have said no. I could have said, let's find someone else, I'll help find someone else. But it's like my system kind of knew that's what I needed. Right.
Yeah.
And I believe that these things don't happen by chance. And I brought my baby. There were only like me and 2 other people. I brought the baby to the office. I did go out, but the baby often came with, and then we had someone come at one point, like the caregiver would come along with, we'd all hang out at the office.
Yeah. Love it.
Because that time we didn't have laptops where you could actually do it at home. Like I had my desktop that I had to go and do in the office. So I love what you're talking about. And it doesn't mean it was easy, but you found ways, right? And these ways worked for you. So so keep going. Say more about how you met some of these challenges, things that were different, what you liked, what you didn't like about it. Anything you want to share about that part?
Yeah. So there were 2 really profound differences that I noticed immediately when I was writing a book with a baby versus before I had been a mom. Mm-hmm. And the first, I'll do this one first. This one really caught me by surprise. So just as a reminder, I had written a synopsis of this novel and a couple of sample chapters of it to sell it. So I had already developed the 3 main characters. They were students on a college campus. They were all women. So it was kind of like the novel centered around the orbit, like it orbited these 3 women's lives and how their lives intersected at this Southern university. I had developed it enough that I was excited about it. My literary agent was, my publisher bought it, like there was a lot of excitement around it. Well, when I went back to it, so we sent it off, we sent it to the publisher, right? I get the email when I'm in the hospital bed, like it's sold.
Right.
And by this point, I hadn't looked at it in probably 2 months because it's pretty, it took a while for my editor to actually look at it, bring it to the acquisitions team at the publisher and all that. So I probably hadn't looked at it in 2 months. And then couple more weeks went by because I actually needed a little more time before I was ready. When I went back to read the material that I had written before I had a baby, but now I had a baby, what struck me immediately was that there were no moments in this whole story I had created where I had given these characters joy, not intentionally. Mm-hmm. And I think the reason it struck me so much is because I remember one of the most pronounced desires I had as soon as my son was born was I wanted him to have joy. It was I just want to create joy for this person. I want him to have moments of joy. And it was I was still in that early state too, where that felt really almost overwhelming. It was I just want to give him such a good life. It was that overpowering sensation. It was almost like I was coming back to these fictional characters and seeing them for the first time as someone's children, oh no, but if in this fictional world, these are someone's children and their parents would want them to have joy. Not that there's not going to be conflict in the book, obviously, because the story is conflict, but it felt like this big absence to me all of a sudden. And I remember immediately writing this one scene for one of the characters where she got to have joy. And it was a small moment of joy. I mean, it wasn't I don't even remember what it was. It was little, but I just remember I need to give her something just to get this off my chest because I was feeling that absence. So that was interesting. And ever since then, I'm very conscious of it, how much joy I'm giving my characters and if they're getting those moments in my fiction. And then the other thing that really changed, it was my process because I said, in my 20s and very early 30s, I just had hours and hours a day. And then it was, I'm going to write this in 7 months on my maternity leave because I've 7 weeks on my maternity leave because I've decided to. And I have childcare for 4 hours a day. And that includes, I got to pump somewhere in there. If I'm not,
I got to eat.
I'm not at home. Yeah. I got to get some food. I have to walk wherever I'm going or take the train. So maybe it would end up being probably 2 hours or so of writing a day.
Yeah.
And so I had to get efficient. It was the most writing had ever for me felt when you're at an actual job and you get a project that has constraints. It's here's your budget, here's your timeline, here's what you have to work with, and here are your deliverables, right? They're not just take as long as you need and spend as much time as you need. That's just not what happened. So this was much more okay, let me get serious about this. I need to write. And I remember I had started writing by hand because I found the computer really daunting all of a sudden, probably under this pressure I was putting on myself. And so I figured out, okay, if I write 10 pages by hand a day, I will finish. So it was okay, every day I write 10 pages by hand. And then I made this storyboard and it was I'm checking off the scenes as I'm writing them. I just got organized. I'd never been this organized before. It's the necessity is the mother of invention kind of thing.
Right.
That was a huge benefit to my writing career because I learned how to make it into an actual project. It wasn't just throwing spaghetti at the wall for years and seeing what happens. It was no, let me get my head around this and be the project manager, not just the kind of writer chasing the muse. I carried that with me. And still, the skills that I developed, I think in those couple months were life-changing.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I'm struck by so many aspects of what you're sharing, Mary, that I just want to underline or basically just kind of reiterate it because it's so powerful. But that both of these, so again, in the Rewrite the Mother Code framework, I approach it from we all mother, but I focus on all women mother, and whether we're mothering a child or a project like a book or a career or a relationship, where we're putting this focused energy is where we mother.
Mhm.
And these kind of there happen to you simultaneously. And so we'll go back to the like you birthed two
Yeah.
beings at that moment. And I love how you're then seeing the gifts that each of them gave you, but that they intersected, right? Like that,
Yeah.
the joy that you were then bringing to the book process, this whole awareness and awakening that wouldn't have been there had you not had this experience with your newborn son of, what you wanted him to have and to give him. So you got a process from the book that was really valuable. You got the joy that came into the book, and everybody's benefiting, right? But I don't think that could have been possible had you not been so aware that you were making this choice. And this isn't something you said, but it feels clear to me that it's like, I'm not victimized by this. No one's making me do this. I chose this and I'm going to go for it. Right. And it feels okay. It feels right. Right. It doesn't feel like, oh, I'm trying to be a super mom, or I'm trying to be this, or I have to do it because this is what my mother would have done, like this is really felt very much of your choosing. And then we get to learn and grow in both of those, but see how they, for me, just shows like how they are so much alike and how we can learn about ourselves in our motherhood and our mothering of everything. They're not these distinct silos. It's not like, oh, okay, now I just go home and like, I'm a mother of this child. And then I turn that off. And then I go to, my book writing and like, now I'm author, writer, and none of that exists. It's like, no, it's so feminine to have it all exist together and have it, just be such a powerful combination. So anyway, I wanted to like say all that more, just see what you're yesing about.
Yeah, I love that. I never thought about it that way, but you're so right that like one was a gift from my son was giving me this gift for my creativity, and my creativity was also giving me this gift at the time, which is like learning how to carve out time and not think it was what you were just saying. Like it didn't have to be at odds with mothering or competing with time with my son or something. Right. No, they weren't. And
they're benefiting each other.
They're totally benefiting each other. And I think it's funny. I was, when sometimes you go through your photos on your phone or your phone shows you old photos from the past and you're like, what? I forgot about that. Especially, and I think a lot of times after having a child, like everything is such a blur that you forget whole swaths of time,
Sure.
like, but I saw this photo the other day on my phone. I don't remember if it turned it up or if I found my way there somehow, but it was of like a sleeping newborn on my lap. And then like, he was kind of laying in my left arm. And then my right arm I was writing on my tablet. And it was just like, oh, I had such nostalgia looking at it because it was like, that's how it felt. It all felt like part of the same, like you said, it's all mothering. It's just like mothering in different fields, but
different arenas, different aspects. But, sometimes they were like directly together. Like, I love that picture. I might have you send me that.
I will.
I'd love to see that picture because sometimes they're happening like together, oh, honey, we're in this together. Like, mommy does this too. Like, I'm nurturing, holding you, and I'm doing this. And sometimes they're separate, but I'm bringing the best of them to each other. And we're not going to pretend it's like was always easy or that there weren't like big challenges. And we can talk about that. But I think having the overall sense that it's like, oh, and something else I wanted to say, because I loved when you said like a computer, that's not where my brain was, right? Like, it's like your brain allowed enough space for the structure, but you are in a different mode and our brains they change after given birth, right? There's literal things. So, and I love that you hand wrote. I think there's something creative and different about that. It wasn't like, oh, I can't use a computer, so I guess I can't do this, right? It was like, no. And then that lent itself, I probably to a different access than it might have. I'm saying this just with a little bit I know about, writing versus computer writing and our brains and creativity. There's this whole like masculine, feminine interchanges that are happening that I just, so excited about what you're sharing. Hi, I'm so excited to share with you my 2024 Spring Equinox Self-Mothering Retreat that's happening this March 2024. And I would love for you not only to consider it, but to attend. But in considering it, hey, just knowing that you would be leaving cold weather, if that's the space that you're in, and coming down to just magnificently beautiful, warm, nourishing place of Zihuatanejo, Mexico. Zihuatanejo meaning land of the goddess women, and coming to really take time for yourself. Okay. And that I am learning more and more isn't just a nice thing to do or something extravagant or something selfish. It's essential. And I really want you to take it seriously, to consider, just think about what would it take for me to go. It's a 5.5-day retreat, getting from where you are, getting there, landing there, and then being in a space that is all about you. It's all about nourishing you. It's all about tuning into you, using everything around us, the nature, the food, the beautiful people, the rituals, ceremonies. I bring it, we really bring it. And we go deeper and deeper as the days go on, and we release, we let go, we bring in what is nourishing, what is empowering, what is that space of just really divine feminine energy. And we do it in the community of women. It's not for everyone. I will be honest, if the idea of leaving and not making it work, or it's just too hard, not for you. If the idea of, spending that amount of time inwardly focused and going to that level of self-awareness doesn't sound like something you're willing to do or put the time and energy into, then it's not for you. And it's good to know that, right? So this is for people who are serious about what it means to mother themselves, what it means to take time for ourselves, and that gift and what that gift can bring to us. It was originally right after my fall retreat. It filled right up. But now some people, it turns out, are not able to come. So I do have a handful of openings. And if you're listening to this and you're willing to take that step, please reach out to me. We can do a discovery call, or you can put a deposit down. I would love that. And you can do that by going to my website, www.drgertrudelyons, DrGertrudelyons.com. Go to events, and there you go. It'll all be there. There's a beautiful page there for you to explore. I look forward to hearing from you and then seeing you on my spring retreat.
I was so blown away by how handwriting it allowed me to be creative in a way that I would just shut down at the computer. And the difference was so striking to me that I started to read about the research around handwriting, because I was like, I wanted to know. I'm like, what is happening in my brain that is different than what I said at a computer? Yeah. And I just dipped a little bit into it. But when I found this one study that was super fascinating, where the researchers found that when we handwrite, it's very similar to when we read in terms of the parts of our brain that are being activated. And that does not happen when we type. Mm-hmm. And I thought that, oh, that's cool. That felt right to me. Handwriting does feel closer to my experience of reading a book than typing does. So I thought that was interesting.
Well, and you would have never done that, weren't you, trying to navigate? Sounds like, who knows? You might have tried it because you might have come across an article, but the circumstance, like you said, it wasn't happening for me, given where my head was, at that time. But then there was that whole masculine aspect of figuring out, how much do I need to write to get this done, and give myself that system, or that, sense of monitoring and kind of being able
milestones.
Right. So it's in service of your creativity versus having it take over. Right. It was those things supported, my creativity. And tell me if this is true for you, but I would have a sense that, given that you had that focus time and that's when you worked on it, and yes, you could do a little bit, like you said, holding your son while you were writing, but for the most part, the bulk of it happened while you were in that space, just you, that then the time that you did have with your son and husband was freed up, you were able to then put that energy there.
Exactly. It was nice to have both things going. And I think You said this a couple of minutes ago, and I thought it was really important and wanted to affirm that that was correct in my case. Like you said, I think it's that it was important that you had the choice, like no one was making you do it. I very much definitely like 100% think that. Like it felt empowering because I chose to do it.
Yeah.
And I mean, years later, I was remembering when you said that years later, I made the opposite decision about a book after a pregnancy loss. And that was just a situation where it was like, I didn't have the energy to write this book that I had put together the proposal for and that we were like all gung ho about, and had to be like, no, I don't want to write that anymore. And so it was also an empowering decision. It was just the opposite decision, you know? And I think, I don't know what there is there, but something about
there is something big there, which is just because that worked well then doesn't mean that's now the formula, right? Like, or, oh, look, like this is coming at me again at a circumstance around pregnancy. And this time it's the loss, but I should still be able to do it because I did it last time. But no, this is a whole new situation. Let's retune in and look and see, what do I need now for this circumstance? And I just love and I'm applauding you for, at whatever level or however, you know, and maybe you can talk about like, what was that like? And did you have any opposition to it ever, or ever any voices or doubt of what you should do? Or was it just pretty clear?
It was pretty clear. And it's interesting, you know, a second ago, you said the thing about how our brains change after childbirth. And it felt like that. I mean, it felt like that with childbirth. I did feel like becoming mom overnight changed my biology. Right? You're just like, whoa, I just got rewired. Like it feels very magical, you know? It's like, how did that happen so instantaneously? Yeah. And I know everyone doesn't feel like that, but I think a lot of people do. I did. But
well, I think it's a matter of tuning into it. I think for some women, and, you know, you're sharing how it was like, whoa, kind of cool. Like, wow. I think for some women that I've worked with, it's like, there's something out of control about that. I think there's a control, like, I just want to get back to how I was, or there can be some fear that goes along with it. And, you know, if we don't kind of explore that and look at it, it can be very disconcerting and upsetting. And then we're just trying to like get back to that same person I was before, but you kind of can't. So you can go up in odds with each other till you like more so surrender to it. Yeah.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense to me. I had a series of miscarriages. So I had recurrent miscarriages.
So sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It was the hardest year I ever had. And I actually have done a lot of writing. I'm working on a memoir about it now. So I am processing it through writing, which is how I process everything. I had this moment after my third one that was kind of, it felt like what we're talking about in a way. It was like rewiring of my brain, like almost made like a science sound, like, where it was like, you are not the same now. Like, sorry, you can't write that book. Like it was just matter of fact. It was, I mean, I'm sure there's still a part of me that could have been like, no, we're going to do it because we said we would. And this is that part of me could have kicked in, but I think it would have been futile because it really was like, I don't have anything to say in that book anymore. Like that book is just dead. There's just no energy there. That's just not going to happen now. And I think I am very attuned to that kind of, just because of the nature of what I write, which is I write creatively. Like that's the kind of writing I've done now for, 15 years. So not that I'm like perfect at doing this, but I am very aware that it's this kind of dance with inspiration, and then I can't do it on my own. Like if I'm not feeling inspired, it's just not going to happen. Like, and that's different than say just writer's block or feeling daunted by the computer screen. Like we were talking about, like that's very different. Like those are solvable things, right? You just handwrite, or I could go on a walk, but when the inspiration itself just suddenly goes dry, there's no point. And like, that's done for me. It was that kind of feeling, which was different.
I love you articulating it. So this is something that people could recognize in themselves. Like those are important distinctions, right? Is this just a hurdle to get over? Like what's in my way? Cause I'm really excited to write this book, but I'm running up against some challenges, as opposed to like, No, there's more to it than that. Like I could figure out how to get this book written, but that isn't I'm not connecting to it right now in the way that it needs at this point in time. And
Yeah. It's sort of the difference between like fear. I mean, fear has energy, right? Like fear is very energizing, actually. It's like the most energizing thing. You're like trying to run from a lion. I mean, it's
right.
So fear is actually not dead. I would not call that dead or flat. And so fear is actually something I think is good to try to work through if that's what's in the way. This is more what I'm talking about. It feels to me very different than fear. It's like trying to squeeze juice out of a lemon that has no juice in it. Like there's not energy there anymore. It's not scary. It's just not anything.
Right. Well, and I think maybe it's connected to like what you were saying earlier. This was again like something that you had energy for, and then you went through this series of losses, and then this particular loss where you then had the choice point. Like, is that when the book was accepted and you could have written it then? Or
we were sending it out. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We were in the process of sending it out.
Yeah. It's like, nope, I'm going to listen to what's going on inside, and it's a no. Right. And I'm not that person I was when we, this, and that's what I need. I need that person for this book. Right. Like I need, and she's not here right now, and she may or may not be. I don't know.
Yeah.
Did you end up writing this book later or no, that one
that one's gone.
Oh,
it's funny because
it's kind of, I love how these are all like coinciding with what's going on with you, right? Like,
isn't it interesting? I didn't realize that until just now. That's really interesting. Yeah.
To put these together and see like, oh, wow, these energies are really connected for me, right? Like they're really tied together, how I'm experiencing both of these worlds. They're all my world. They're just expressions of me in a different way, in different mediums, right?
Yeah. Different kinds of mothering, like you said earlier.
Yeah. And the most important and like what I'm underlining, around you and these choices and tuning in is the mothering of yourself, right? And making these choices like that mother myself, because if I'm going to put all that care and attention and make this happen, like I got to be doing things that take care of me first and foremost. And I think that's something that I know you were doing. We've talked about in this, but do for yourself and do for your clients, or do for the people that work with you or that are in your incubator. I mean, I think that's why it's called an incubator and not like a factory. Right.
Exactly.
And I'm very much looking at the connection of conceiving, creating, and giving birth as I'm writing a book on how tied they are. Right. So this process and incubator, womb, whatever we want to call it, because I know that might seem a little odd if, men are in your, but I think it is. And I think we can all feel more connected when we see the intersection of these processes versus the distinctions.
Too. I think the connections you're drawing are really cool to see. And because I agree, like the way that the energies intersect it's just fascinating. And like,
right.
I was going to say something else about the birthing process. Oh yeah. About you're working on your book and how it's similar. I mean, I think another way in which a book is so similar is the letting go. I mean, I know you're not to this stage yet, but
I've been hearing about it. I feel like that woman who was like pregnant or whatever, and is starting to hear more and more about like, oh, this is the easy part. Wait till you that's so
right.
You're so focused on that. You can't even like kind of really think, oh no, I'm sure it'll be fine. Or, okay, it's hard, but so is this. And then all these people that say like, oh, I had no idea how.
And
it's raising the child is like a whole,
exactly such a parallel here. Like you're never going to sleep again. Just you wait, like, it's like that. I mean, it's so worth it. That's why I keep doing it. Like it's so worth it. I love putting books out in the world, but it's weird. I mean, it's a kind of like, they take on a life of their own. People interpret them in ways that you can't control, and that
so vulnerable, this thing that you created and like, incubated and brought into the world, and people get to like openly judge it and like say things about it. And,
yes. Leave you 1-star reviews.
Yes.
There's a Facebook group. I'm not on Facebook anymore, but back when I was, this was one of the parts I liked. There was a group called Author 1-Star Reviews, and authors joined it. And it was the only thing anyone ever shared was their 1-star reviews. And it was just like this very
got to be light
place.
about it and got to like just have a space. Yes, I love that. It's
because everyone gets them. Everyone gets them. Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. I mean, if Shakespeare were now, like he would have gotten 1-star reviews,
I'm
right?
sure
like
it still does.
It still does, right? That's so true.
Right now. Yeah.
This is crap. Like you don't know what you're talking about. You're a terrible writer. No, I love all of this. And so I'd love, and of course, it's like, I always feel like we're just getting going and I want to do like a whole nother hour. But I would like you to say a few things about how you work, with your authors in the incubator, and then how people can find you if this is striking a chord with them.
Yeah, I'd love to. So those couple months when I became a project manager for my own book and actually figured out like a system and a process, I was so excited about it. It was like, I want to teach people this thing because it worked. And I like wrote a book in a couple months doing this. So basically, that's kind of how it was born. It was me wanting to teach what I had figured out, not just then, but also before in the years leading up to it. I mean, I hadn't known anything about publishing works. Like, how do I even get a book published? What is a literary agent? Like, I didn't know any of that stuff. And so I thought, well, I've like accrued all of this knowledge. Like, I've hobbled it together. So like, I can probably share this with people and it would be helpful. So anyway, that's what was the original idea for the book incubator, which it evolved into over time. And so now I work with clients, like you mentioned at the beginning of the episode, to write their novels and memoirs, and then to revise them, and then to get them out in the world, whether that's going what we call the traditional publishing route, which is typically finding a literary agent who sells your book to a publisher. But there are increasingly more and more other ways to publish too that are not just self-publishing, but do include self-publishing. There are smaller publishers, many of them, more and more popping up by the day. There are what are called hybrid publishers, where you kind of share some of the profits or rights with them. And like, there's just really some really interesting arrangements out there.
It's a whole other world and landscape.
Yeah, you could do a deep dive and spend hours and hours researching this. But I think the cool thing about it is that there are a lot of ways you can very professionally get a book into the world and in front of readers and distribute it. And they can get digital copies or hard copies. And I just think that's cool. It's a cool time that we're alive for the people who want to write books for that reason. So all of that's to say, if people are interested in learning more about that program, they can go to thebookincubator.com. That's where I have all that info.
And is it the Book Incubator, THE?
Yeah, it's the
incubator.
bookincubator.com.
Great.
And then I also have a podcast and a YouTube channel where I share writing tips and stuff. So if they're just looking to I'm like someone who just likes to binge content when I'm trying to learn how to do something. Like I just want to listen to a bunch of little episodes on how to do it. They could go to either of those places. So my podcast is called The First Draft Club. And it's just like these short little episodes of me talking and sharing writing strategies. And then the YouTube channel is the exact same thing. So it's just 2 versions of me sharing writing advice.
Hey, well, wonderful. Well, I hope the aspiring novelists and writers like check you out and find out more and explore, because they should. And I think it is one of those like inklings, like you don't have to know, you don't have to have decided you're doing it. I think sometimes just taking steps to like follow like a small inkling, or a spark, like, let me just tip my toe in that water.
Yeah.
And I think that, and talking to people like you is so, so helpful with that. I always close every episode with this question, which is, what does rewrite the mother code mean to you?
I think this conversation has inspired me today to think about it as like, I feel like I'm going to walk away from this conversation thinking about how I mother in ways that are not just my literal mothering of the child that I have, and myself, like you said, but also my creative work. I think it's really cool to think about creative work as being something we mother and nurture. And like, if we do think about it that way, how does that change how we relate to it?
Yeah.
Right. That would be a fun thing to journal on, I think.
Right. What energy can I, now that I know that, is what more is available to me in that regard? And what can I bring that I didn't necessarily know I had access to, or, help build on each other.
Exactly.
I love that. That's beautiful. Oh, thanks, Mary.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, and thank you so much for being on today and us being able to dig in and have this conversation. I'm always so inspired, and yet again inspired today, being with you and your journey. And I know my audience will be too. So thank you so much.
It was such a pleasure. You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for choosing yourself and taking the time to listen to this podcast. As always, please rate, review, and subscribe to Rewrite the Mother Code. It helps other people who need this message, aka all women, well, actually everybody, men included, to find it. I'm honored to have you on this journey in mothering yourself. Remember, change is uncomfortable, but it's beautiful, and it starts with us. And if you can't wait until next week's episode, follow me on Instagram and LinkedIn at Dr. Gertrude Lyons, or at my website, drgertrudelyons.com, and sign up for my newsletter. I'll see you next time.